I didn't kill her physically, but in the back of my mind, she died.
When word first spread through the city that the body of 15-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez had been found, decomposed inside David's Tesla, nobody believed it at first. But federal agents just dropped brand new findings that officially cleared David of any involvement in the murder. And the person they've now named changes everything we thought we knew about this case. While the internet was busy dragging David, the actual facts told a completely different story. So let's rewind the clock to September 8, 2025, the day this whole thing first broke loose. Workers over at Hollywood Tow on North Mansfield Avenue started complaining about a nasty odor leaking from a black 2023 Tesla Model 3 that had been hauled in a few days earlier. That car had been left sitting abandoned in the Hollywood Hills for nearly a month before it got picked up. Just parked out in one of La's richest neighborhoods, the kind of place where a dusty car sticks out immediately. When Lapp showed up around 12:30 p.m. that afternoon and cracked open the front trunk, or the frunk, as Tesla heads call it, they found heavily decomposed human remains stuffed in a black plastic bag, weighing roughly 71 pounds. The condition was so bad that it took investigators 9 full days, until September 17, 2025, to confirm through dental records, DNA, and a small shirt tattoo on her right index finger that the body belonged to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And this right here is where things start getting wild, because once you look past the online noise, the truth paints a completely different picture. Now yeah, the Tesla was registered in David's name, but the 20-year-old artist wasn't even in LA when this all went down. He was out on his We World tour, performing across North America, with receipts, footage, and timestamps proving exactly where he was the entire time. But let's not ignore Celeste's story either, because hers is tragic in every sense. Celeste was first reported missing on April 5, 2024, from her home in Lake Elsinore, California, at just 13 years old. But this wasn't her first disappearance. She'd run away multiple times that same year, February 14th, March 19th, and again April 5th. Between February 2024 and April 2025, Riverside County Sheriff's deputies had been called to her home 11 different times for minor incidents and suspicious activity. Her ex-boyfriend later shared that she'd been struggling with serious problems at home, painting a picture of a young girl in deep emotional turmoil that went far beyond any one relationship. But of course, the internet didn't wait for the facts. Matching tattoos? Guilty. Old photos? Guilty. A leaked track called Celeste? Guilty again. The public decided the verdict before police even spoke. But here's what the authorities actually said, and more importantly, what they didn't. Lap Captain Scott M. Williams confirmed, "We know for certain that Celeste Rivas Hernandez is deceased and that her body was placed inside the front trunk of David Burke's Tesla." But he also added something key. There's still no clear evidence of criminal involvement beyond someone hiding the body. That statement changed everything. Because after all these weeks of digging, David hasn't been listed as a suspect, hasn't been detained, and has been working fully with investigators since day one. David's representatives told several major outlets that he's been fully briefed on the situation, and even though he's still on tour, he's been in full cooperation with law enforcement. But here's where things take a major turn. The most crucial update so far came straight from forensic experts dissecting this case. Dr. Amy Santoro, a seasoned forensic scientist and former crime scene investigator with a PhD, publicly stated that early autopsy results suggest Celeste's death may have been caused by a drug overdose, as there were no visible signs of trauma. Santoro explained that if toxicology results confirm that conclusion, homicide charges would be unlikely, since the investigation would shift away from deliberate violence. That right there changes the whole lens of this case. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office has officially postponed ruling on the cause and manner of death, noting there was no pregnancy and that the heavy decomposition made it impossible to pinpoint an exact cause right away. Without an official homicide label, the case sits in a legal limbo that throws the entire murder story into question, the same story that social media ran wild with. Criminal defense lawyer Alexandra Kazarian told News Nation that, based on what's been made public, there's zero evidence tying David to any crime at all, even with circumstantial details like the car and the rumored connection to Celeste. She added that Lapt is being deliberately careful, keeping certain info private due to how little has been verified. Now let's talk about the topic everybody's been whispering about, the alleged relationship. Sure, Celeste's mom told TMZ that her daughter once mentioned dating a guy named David. Yeah, they supposedly had matching tattoos. And yes, there are screenshots and old photos floating around online. But what's missing from all that gossip is the actual context that everyone seems to skip. Josh Marshall, David's manager, and the person who leased that Hollywood Hills property where David occasionally stayed, stated that he had no clue about anything tied to the incident. He mostly worked remote and barely interacted with clients in person. The timeline itself completely wrecks the online theory that David was involved. The Tesla had reportedly been sitting abandoned in the hills for nearly 3 weeks before it got towed on or around September 3, 2025. During that entire window, David was verifiably on tour performing in multiple states. Locals even said they'd seen that same car parked there as early as mid-August, long before the discovery was made. When investigators later estimated that Celeste's body had been deceased for around 2 to 4 weeks, that timeline pointed to her death happening while David was already out of town. This part becomes key when you realize others could have accessed the vehicle, which complicates the narrative in a big way. As the investigation rolled through late September 2025, what became clear wasn't the guilt everyone on social media swore was obvious, but rather how tangled this case truly was. It involved a missing teenager with a difficult past, a car several people could use, and a cause of death that still had forensic teams stumped. On September 17, 2025, LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division executed a search warrant at a Hollywood Hills rental property on the 1300 block of Daney Place, a house being leased by David's manager, Josh Marshall, for roughly $20,000 a month since February 2024. Detectives scoured the home for biological evidence, checked drains for traces of blood, and seized multiple electronics including a laptop for digital analysis. But then something strange happened. Just a week later, around September 24th to 25th, the lease was abruptly ended and the property completely cleared out. The homeowner, Mladen Trifunovic, confirmed that Marshall contacted him saying they'd be vacating immediately. He also added that when the lease began back in early 2024, everything seemed entirely normal with no issues whatsoever. That sudden move out sparked a whole new wave of theories online, with people instantly assuming it meant someone was covering something up. But let's be real for a second. When your client house gets raided in a major death investigation and reporters are parked out front 24/7, staying there isn't an option anymore, guilty or not. The property was fitted with outside surveillance cameras that might hold key evidence, but the landlord said he couldn't access any footage without tenant consent or a court order. Now let's zoom out for a sec and talk science, because forensic evidence has limits, especially in cases like this. Celeste's advanced state of decomposition, her body weight reduced to around 71 pounds, made things way harder for investigators. Forensic specialist Dr. Amy Santoro explained that based on the autopsy showing no trauma, the leading theory remains that she may have died from a drug overdose, which would completely shift this from a murder case to what might have been a tragic accident or misadventure.
Michael, a situation that you actually caught us up on last week involving the pop singer David and Celeste Rivas, who's this 17-year-old, and her body was discovered, if memory serves, in the trunk of a Tesla that was found in a rental car lot in California.
Yeah, and even more tragic, she was 15 now, and when she went missing, she was only 13 years old. She went missing in April of 2024.
That no trauma finding matters a lot, fam. When someone's killed violently, the body usually tells the story. Strangulation leaves bruising, blunt force leaves fractures, and gun or knife wounds leave distinct patterns. The absence of all that, plus the coroner deferring the cause of death until toxicology results come in, paints a scenario totally different from the brutal homicide people online were convinced had happened. And to really understand what could have gone down, you got to look at Celeste's background. She had a long record of running away, with deputies showing up at her family home 11 times in just over a year for domestic calls and small disturbances. Locals in Lake Elsinore remembered she'd gone missing at least 3 separate times in 2024, often leaving little notes or being spotted near random cars. Her ex described a tense, unstable home life. All of this gives crucial context for exploring other possible explanations. For real, when a teenager's constantly escaping tough family situations, they might crash with whoever gives them attention, take risks, and wind up in dangerous spots involving drugs or sketchy people, without it meaning anyone planned her death. Private investigators even reported that back in 2024, some relatives allegedly emailed David's management about Celeste disappearing, and she came home the very next day, suggesting maybe someone intervened. But Josh Marshall denied ever seeing those emails, proving how blurred the line between fact and rumor has gotten. The online rumor mill only got wilder when people started dissecting David's lyrics like evidence in court. His breakout track Romantic Homicide, with lines like "In the back of my mind, you died, and I didn't even cry," was spun into proof that he was confessing through music. But David cleared that up himself in a genius interview.
So what inspired the hook, "In the back of my mind you died," is kind of like the storytelling aspect of the lyrics that came before it, in a way that it builds up to the big moment where she died in the back of my mind. I didn't kill her physically, but in the back of my mind, she died. And I didn't even cry, not a single tear. I've seen people online take different meanings and interpretations from that one part of the song where it's like it's their past selves that's dying. And they're not even crying about it because they're evolved or become better people or have killed addictions and other different stuff like that. So I think it's very powerful.
That song dropped back in July 2022, more than a year before Celeste ever went missing. The claim that it released on her birthday was also fully debunked, but misinformation spread anyway, feeding the online frenzy. Even though the actual facts never matched the theories, David's career still took a major hit. He pulled out of the rest of his tour, cancelling his Seattle, San Francisco, and LA shows, while brands like Crocs and Hollister cut ties completely. Streaming platforms started pushing his tracks way less, and his rising momentum took a huge blow. Still, not everyone turned on him. Streamers Jason Lewin and Elle Wig even went live discussing the situation, trying to bring some balance back to the conversation.
Background reports have emerged that D4 paused his ongoing tour after a woman's body, later identified as a 15-year-old, was found inside a Tesla registered to his name. TMZ reported that the victim and the singer shared the same tattoo, Shush, on the same finger.
He was obsessed with the victim, wrote songs about her, had matching tattoos, and tons of pics together. She was still a
But even the people trying to defend David started catching heat. Fam Jason was one of the first to say straight up that David wasn't a killer, but as more scattered details surfaced, the internet turned on him fast. Another streamer, Rain, later backed Jason's early comments, saying that standing by a friend before hard evidence drops is understandable, but doubling down after proof appears would be a bad move. Meanwhile, the Tesla itself became the main piece of the puzzle. These cars come packed with Sentry mode cameras and onboard data tracking, meaning they record almost everything. Former media host DJ Academics even pointed out that if David had done something criminal inside that Tesla, it would have been incredibly reckless, since the car logs every move. With that kind of tech, cops should have had an easy time piecing together the truth. And by late September rolling into October 2025, that truth started to unfold, revealing something far more complicated than the murder story that social media pushed so hard early on. Evidence began to suggest this was less a cold-blooded crime and more a heartbreaking series of events surrounding a vulnerable teen, drugs, and risky choices. Tragic, but not necessarily murder. Forensic scientist Dr. Amy Santoro kept emphasizing that investigators believe Celeste's death likely came from an overdose, which became the biggest revelation yet. In multiple posts she made around early October, Santoro explained that if toxicology backs up the overdose theory, homicide charges wouldn't stick, since the death might have been self-inflicted or accidental, connected to Celeste's history of instability and dangerous behavior. This fits perfectly with the facts we already know: no trauma in the autopsy, her repeated disappearances, and the extreme decomposition that made pinpointing a cause nearly impossible. The coroner's decision to defer classification wasn't about hiding info. It reflected genuine scientific uncertainty. And that brings us right back to the Tesla, the key piece of this entire puzzle. Reports confirmed David owned multiple cars and that his Tesla was one several people had access to. The vehicle had been parked and abandoned for weeks while David was confirmed to be on tour across the country. The estimated timeline of Celeste's death, several weeks before discovery, directly overlapped with his absence from LA. So that raises serious questions. If David wasn't even in town when Celeste passed, and if her death was from an overdose, then what kind of crime, if any, could he be charged with? Could it be that she died somewhere else, and someone, maybe trying to dodge attention or legal heat, moved her body into his car while he was gone? Or could she have used his Tesla herself, maybe with some people she was hanging around, before tragedy struck? These possibilities open the door to a much murkier truth than the internet was ready to accept. That's why Lap Captain Scott M. Williams' statement now makes way more sense. He confirmed that Celeste's body was found in the front trunk of David Burke's Tesla, but that it's still unclear if any crime was committed beyond hiding the body. And that's an important distinction. Fam, concealing a body is a crime, sure, but it's not the same thing as causing someone's death. Then there's another strange detail that's been throwing people off. Surveillance footage showing Celeste alive in her parents' backyard on September 8, 2024, exactly 1 year to the day before her body was discovered. That clip, timestamped 5 months after she was supposedly missing for the last time, showed she hadn't been gone non-stop like people thought. She apparently came home off and on, possibly even for her 14th birthday on September 7, 2024. So the question becomes, was she ever truly missing for a full year? Or was the timeline everyone believed completely off? TMZ recently got hold of that backyard footage, dated September 8, 2024, and it's now reshaping how investigators and the public view this entire story. That date stands out for a couple of powerful reasons. First, it's 5 months after she was supposedly last seen alive. And even sadder, it's just 1 day after her 14th birthday, suggesting that maybe Celeste came home to celebrate it. Her birthday was on September 7th, and that footage was dated September 8th. In her Drop Dead Serious report, journalist Ashley Banfield highlighted how officers were called to the Rivas-Hernandez home 11 different times in just over a year, including 3 separate visits on March 19, 2024, the same day Celeste was caught on liquor store cameras sprinting down the street. All these moments form a picture of a girl trapped in a cycle of vanishing, returning, and living in chaos that constantly drew police attention. The deeper investigators dug, the more they uncovered about Celeste's family situation. Early reports suggested her parents might have fled the country or were undocumented, but exclusive documents obtained by News Nation showed that both parents were actually legal residents with valid social security numbers issued back in 2001. A former neighbor who lived in the same public housing complex between 2019 and 2020 said they sometimes overheard the parents arguing about custody of their kids, though there was never any sign of divorce. Altogether, what emerges is a story not of monsters, but of a broken system. a struggling household, a young girl desperate to escape, and a tragedy born from layers of pain rather than one single act of evil. That doesn't make it less tragic. If anything, it makes it more heartbreaking. Real talk, Celeste Rivas Hernandez deserved so much better than what she got. From a legal perspective, the overdose theory changes everything. Without the case being ruled a homicide, prosecutors have little ground to push murder charges on anyone. Former DAS explained that while arrests can technically happen without a final cause of death, the lack of concrete proof of foul play makes it nearly impossible to secure convictions. The act of hiding the body could still be criminal, but figuring out who did that, especially when multiple people might have had access to the Tesla, is its own uphill battle. Through his representatives, David has consistently maintained that he had no idea anything bad had happened and that has been cooperating with investigators from the start. The online talk about possible grooming, given Celeste's age, remains a whole other controversy. Screenshots allegedly showing Discord chats between someone named Celeste and David from 2022 raise questions about when and how they first connected. But so far, officials haven't confirmed those messages are real, nor have they filed any charges tied to exploitation or statutory misconduct. Under California law, if any sexual relationship did occur between David, who was 20, and Celeste, who was 13 to 15 during that time, it would absolutely fall under statutory rape. But proving that beyond rumors, screenshots, and speculation would take serious evidence. And as of late October 2025, no such proof or charges have surfaced. Still, the damage to David's image is undeniable, whether or not the legal system ever implicates him. His tour's been cancelled, his brand deal scrapped, and his name dragged non-stop online. Even if the courts clear him completely, the shadow of this story will probably stick with him for life. No cap. But here's the bigger takeaway. We, as a society, have to face how fast we rush to label people villains based on fragments of information, viral posts, and emotional narratives. Real talk. Attorney Alexandra Kazarian said it best. Despite the online frenzy, there's been no direct evidence linking David to any crime. LAPT has been extra cautious in its wording from the start, never naming him as a suspect, likely because investigators knew early on that the facts didn't back the story the internet was pushing. The death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez remains a tragedy no matter what, but it's one that reminds us how easily grief, gossip, and digital outrage can twist a complex reality into something far simpler and far less true. Fam, at the heart of all this is a 15-year-old girl who kept trying to escape a tough life and ended up gone, her body left behind in a car. Her family is grieving hard. They started a GoFundMe to cover her funeral and memorial costs, while people in Lake Elsinore held candlelight vigils, calling her a sweet, gentle kid who never deserved the pain she went through. As we wait on those final toxicology results and for prosecutors to decide whether any charges will be filed, one thing's becoming clear. The real evidence, the forensics, and the timeline tell a story that's way more complicated than the viral murder narrative that took over everyone's feed. Dr. Amy Santoro noted that we're still weeks away from any formal charges, meaning that even if charges do drop, they might look very different from what the internet's been expecting. The real takeaway here goes beyond just this tragedy. Real talk. In today's era of instant outrage and social media detectives, we've got to stop rushing to convict people off coincidences and screenshots. Because here's the truth. The American justice system, flawed as it is, especially when it comes to folks from the hood, is built on one crucial idea: innocent until proven guilty. And that's not just a slogan, fam. It exists because people make mistakes, stories get twisted, and circumstantial evidence can straight up lie. When we throw that principle out the window in the court of public opinion, we end up ruining lives based on half-truths and theories instead of facts. The coroner's report is still the key that unlocks what really happened to Celeste. Until those toxicology tests come back and get fully analyzed, everything else is just noise. And that's the difference between calling this a tragic accident versus a deliberate act, between seeing it as a failure of the system versus blaming it all on one person. Appreciate you for watching, fam, and if you want to keep following stories like this, click one of the cards on your screen to dive deeper.